The Jade Palace floated among the stars like a jewel suspended in darkness. Its crystalline towers caught the light of 3 distant suns, casting rainbow patterns across the diplomatic hall where representatives from 100 worlds had gathered. The air hummed with a dozen different languages, and beings of every imaginable shape moved through the grand corridors. Some walked, some floated, and some flew through the vaulted ceilings designed to accommodate wings of all sizes. In the Eastern Garden, away from the celebration, Princess Vessa sat alone on a stone bench beneath a flowering tree. Her scales gleamed like polished emeralds in the fading light, and her long tail curled protectively around her feet. She was beautiful by any measure, with elegant features and intelligent amber eyes. But when she shifted position, the small twisted wings folded against her back became visible. They were no larger than a human child's arms, delicate and malformed, incapable of lifting her body even an inch from the ground. Inside the palace, her father King Thormax stood among the other rulers, his massive wings spread wide in a gesture of authority. Her 3 brothers soared through the upper halls, performing aerial acrobatics for the admiring crowd. Her 2 sisters glided gracefully between conversation groups, their wings shimmering with each movement. They were everything a dragon should be. Vessa was not. She had learned long ago not to cry about it. Tears changed nothing. The other dragons would still avoid looking at her directly. The alien ambassadors would still follow their host's lead and pretend she did not exist. Her own family would still feel shame when her name was mentioned. So she came to the garden whenever these gatherings happened, finding a quiet corner where she could sit without being seen, without being a reminder of imperfection. The gardens at least were beautiful. Flowers from 50 worlds bloomed in carefully tended beds. Small fountains created soothing sounds that almost covered the music and laughter drifting from inside. Vessa traced patterns in the gravel path with one claw and tried not to think about how the evening would unfold. Soon there would be dancing. The dragons would take to the air in their traditional spiral formation, a display of grace and power that made other species gasp with wonder. She would remain here in the garden, waiting for it to end. Footsteps on the path made her look up. A young human boy was walking toward her carrying a tray with a crystal pitcher and cups. He could not have been more than 15 solar cycles old, with dark curly hair and warm brown skin. His uniform marked him as staff, probably the child of one of the servers. Humans had become valuable in diplomatic settings because of their adaptability and their strange talent for understanding the needs of species very different from themselves. The boy stopped a respectful distance away and bowed slightly. His movements were careful but not fearful. Most beings who came near her either showed pity or disgust. This boy's face showed only polite curiosity. "Your Highness," he said in perfectly clear common tongue, though with a slight human accent. "I brought refreshments. The night is warm and I thought you might be thirsty." Vessa stared at him. No one brought her things. No one sought her out. She was meant to be invisible. "I did not request anything," she said carefully. "I know," the boy replied. He set the tray on the bench beside her and poured a cup of pale blue liquid that sparkled faintly. "But you have been sitting here alone for 2 hours. Everyone gets thirsty." He held out the cup with a small smile. Vessa took it automatically, still confused. The drink was sweet and cold, some kind of fruit blend. She sipped it while watching the boy over the rim of the cup. "What is your name?" she asked. "Malik, Your Highness. My father is Rahim, head of the catering staff." "You should return to your duties, Malik. Being seen with me will not help your father's reputation." Malik tilted his head, genuinely puzzled. Why would talking to a princess harm anyone's reputation? The question was so innocent, so completely without understanding, that Vessa almost laughed. Of course he would not know. Humans had only joined the galactic community 3 generations ago. They did not yet understand all the complex social rules that governed interactions between the older species. "Because I am broken," Vessa said flatly. She shifted her wings slightly, making their deformity more visible. "Dragons are meant to fly. I cannot. In my culture this makes me less than nothing. The other species honor my father by pretending I do not exist." She expected him to make excuses and leave. Instead, Malik looked at her wings with open interest, then met her eyes again. "You are not broken," he said simply. "You are different. Those are not the same thing. To my people they are. Then your people are wrong." He said it so matter-of-factly as if he had just commented on the weather. On Earth, many humans are born with bodies that work differently. Some cannot walk, some cannot see, some cannot hear. We do not pretend they do not exist. We find ways to help them do what they want to do. Vessa felt something strange in her chest, a tightness she could not name. I have never heard of such a place. It is not perfect, Malik admitted. We make mistakes, but we try. My own cousin was born without legs. She uses a wheelchair to move around, and she is studying to become a doctor. One of the best in her class. He paused, then added quietly, she is not less than nothing. Neither are you. For a moment, Vesa could not speak. She had lived 15 years being told through actions and silences that her existence was unfortunate. That she should be grateful for being allowed to stay in the palace. That she should hide herself and not embarrass her family further. And now this human boy, this child of a servant, was telling her she had worth. You are kind, she finally said, her voice rough. But you do not understand dragon culture. What you suggest is impossible. Maybe, Malik said. He smiled again, that same warm expression. But I don't think kindness needs permission. He glanced back toward the palace where music was growing louder. I should return before my father worries. But if you would like, I could bring you something to eat later. The kitchen prepared fire-glazed fruits. They are very good. Before Vesa could respond, he bowed again and walked back down the path, leaving the pitcher and cups behind. She watched him go, this strange human boy who had spoken to her as if she were a person worth knowing. As if her wings did not matter. As if she were not invisible. Inside the palace, the spiral dance was beginning. Dragons took to the air in perfect formation, their wings creating patterns of shadow and light. Vesa did not watch. Instead, she looked at the cup in her hand and thought about a world where broken things were simply different things. Where a girl without legs could become a doctor. Where maybe, just maybe, a dragon who could not fly might still have value. She finished her drink slowly, tasting each sip. When Malik returned an hour later with a plate of the promised fire-glazed fruits, she was still sitting on the bench. This time when he approached, she smiled. Thank you, she said. You are welcome, Your Highness. He set the plate beside her. May I sit for a moment? My feet are tired. Vesa moved over slightly, making room on the bench. Malik sat down with a grateful sigh. They did not speak much, just shared the fruits and listened to the music drifting from the palace. But for the first time in her life, Vesa did not feel alone. And when the evening finally ended, she found herself hoping that tomorrow there would be another gathering, another reason for a human boy with kind eyes to walk down the garden path. Something had changed. Something small but important. And though Vesa did not yet have the words for it, she recognized the feeling blooming in her chest. Was hope. The morning sun filtered through the garden's crystal canopy as Malik made his way down the familiar stone path, a small basket tucked under his arm. It had been 5 days since the diplomatic gathering, and each morning he had found Princess Vesa in the same spot beneath the flowering tree. She always seemed surprised to see him, as if she expected each visit to be the last. Today she was reading from a data tablet, her tail swishing slowly as she concentrated. When she heard his footsteps, she looked up and her amber eyes brightened. That small change in her expression made Malik smile. A week ago, those eyes had held only sadness. Good morning, Your Highness, he said, settling onto the bench beside her without waiting for permission. They had moved past such formalities on the third day. Good morning, Malik. Vesa set aside her tablet. What did you bring today? He opened the basket to reveal warm pastries filled with sweet cream and berries. My father made these fresh an hour ago. He is testing new recipes for next month's trade summit. They ate together in comfortable silence for a few moments. Then Vesa said, Tell me more about Earth. About how humans help people who are different. This had become their routine. Malik would share stories from his home world, and Vesa would listen with an intensity that suggested she was memorizing every word. He told her about ramps built for wheelchairs, about devices that let deaf people see words as people spoke them, about special materials that helped blind people read with their fingers. We call it accessibility, Malik explained. It means making sure everyone can participate in life regardless of how their body works. It is not perfect, but we try to build our world for all kinds of humans, not just one kind. Dragons build everything for flight, Vesa said quietly. Our doorways are high because we soar through them. Our gathering halls have no floors, only perches on the walls. Our cities are vertical, climbing into the clouds. She gestured at her useless wings. For someone like me, even my own home is a prison. Then we redesign the prison, Malik said firmly. He pulled out his own data tablet and began sketching with his finger. Look, if we added platforms here and here, you could move between levels. Or what about lifts powered by crystal energy? I have seen the builders use similar technology. Vesa leaned closer, watching as he drew. You think about these things? About how I could move differently? Of course. You are my friend. He said it simply as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. Vessa's breath caught. Friend, she repeated softly, testing the word. I have never had one of those before. Well, you do now, Malik said, nudging her shoulder gently with his own. And friends help each other solve problems. For the next hour, they sketched and planned together. Malik showed Vessa pictures from Earth of parks and buildings designed for everyone. Vessa taught Malik about dragon architecture and explained why certain designs were considered sacred. They laughed when Malik suggested she could ride on his shoulders like human children did, and she had to explain that even small, she still weighed far more than any human could carry. They were so absorbed in their conversation that neither noticed the shadow that fell across the garden path until a deep voice spoke. Vessa. Princess Vessa stood immediately, her data tablet clattering to the ground. King Thormax stood at the path's entrance, his massive form blocking the sun. His wings were folded tightly against his back, a sign of controlled anger in dragon body language. Behind him, Malik's father Rahim stood with his head bowed, clearly having been summoned. Father, Vessa said, her voice carefully neutral. The king's golden eyes moved from his daughter to Malik, who had also stood and was bowing respectfully. You have been meeting with the human boy every day. It was not a question. Vessa lifted her chin slightly. Yes, father. Malik has been kind enough to keep me company. The other dragons are talking, King Thormax said, his voice low and controlled. They say my daughter has formed an inappropriate attachment to a servant's child. They say she is bringing shame to our family. I bring shame simply by existing, Vessa replied, and though her voice was quiet, there was steel in it. At least now I bring it while having a conversation partner. The king's scales rippled with suppressed emotion. Do not speak that way. You are a princess of the dragon realm. Am I? Then why am I never included in royal functions? Why do my siblings pretend I do not exist? Why am I hidden in gardens during important gatherings? Vessa's voice grew stronger with each question. Malik treats me with more respect in 5 minutes than my own family shows me in a year. Rahim stepped forward quickly, dropping to one knee. Your Majesty, please forgive my son. He is young and does not understand the complexities of your culture. I will ensure he does not bother the princess again. Father, no, Malik protested. Silence, Rahim said sharply, though his eyes were kind when he looked at his son. We are guests here. We must respect their ways. King Thormax studied them all for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Vessa, you will not embarrass this family further. And this friendship. The human boy will return to his duties and stay away from the royal gardens. And if I refuse? Vessa asked. The king's wings flared slightly, a warning. Then I will send the humans away. Rahim has been a valued member of our staff, but he is not irreplaceable. Choose carefully, daughter. Your selfishness could cost others their livelihoods. It was a perfect trap and they all knew it. Vessa's face went pale beneath her green scales. She looked at Malik, then at Rahim, who had always been kind to her in the quiet ways servants could be, and finally back at her father. As you wish, your Majesty, she said, each word seeming to hurt. King Thormax nodded once and turned to leave. Rahim, bring your son. We will discuss his future duties. The king walked back toward the palace, his tail leaving a trail in the gravel. Rahim stood and placed a hand on Malik's shoulder. Come, he said gently. But before they could leave, Vessa spoke quietly, her words barely audible. The night fountain. After the second moon rises. Malik's eyes widened slightly, but he kept his face neutral. Yes, your highness. I understand. Rahim glanced sharply at his son but said nothing. They followed the king back to the palace, leaving Vessa alone in the garden once more. She picked up her fallen data tablet with shaking hands and sat back down on the bench. The pastries Malik had brought were still in the basket, growing cold. That night, after the palace had settled into sleep and the second moon had risen above the eastern towers, Vessa made her way to the fountain in the lower courtyard. It was a place few visited because it required walking down 3 flights of stairs, and most dragons simply flew to the upper levels. For Vessa, it had always been one of the few places she could go without help. Malik was already there, sitting on the fountain's edge. He stood when he saw her, relief clear on his face. You came, he said. You knew I would. I hoped. Malik looked around the empty courtyard. My father is not happy with me. He says I am causing trouble. My father threatened to fire yours. To send your whole family away because I wanted a friend. Vessa's voice cracked slightly. Maybe they are right. Maybe I am selfish. You are not selfish for wanting to be treated like a person, Malik said firmly. He sat back down and patted the space beside him. And I am not going to stop being your friend because your father says so. Vesa joined him, their reflections rippling in the fountain's water. We cannot meet in the gardens anymore. Then we meet here. Or in the library. Or the ground-level conservatory where they keep the earth plants. Malik smiled. Dragons think in 3 dimensions, always looking up. But there is a whole world at ground level they never notice. You want to sneak around? To meet in secret. I want to spend time with my friend, Malik corrected. If we have to be creative about it, then we will be creative. He pulled out his data tablet again. Look, I have been mapping the palace. There are dozens of places designed for walking species that the dragons never use. We could explore them together. Vesa looked at the map he had drawn, showing corridors and rooms and gardens that existed in the palace's lower levels. Places built for the walking staff and visiting species who could not fly. She had never thought of these spaces as belonging to her, but Malik was right. They were accessible to her in ways the upper palace never could be. You are serious about this, she said. Completely. Malik met her eyes. Are you? Vesa thought about her empty days, her lonely garden, her family who could not look at her without feeling shame. Then she thought about Malik's stories of Earth, of a world where different was not the same as broken, of humans who built ramps and lifts and found ways to include everyone. She thought about hope. Yes, she said. I am serious. They shook hands the way humans did, sealing their agreement. And as the second moon climbed higher in the sky, they bent over Malik's tablet together, planning their first secret adventure through the forgotten ground-level passages of the Jade Palace. For the first time in her life, Vesa felt like she was claiming space in the world instead of apologizing for existing in it. The feeling was terrifying and wonderful all at once. 3 weeks had passed since Vesa and Malik began their secret meetings. They had explored forgotten storage rooms filled with artifacts from 100 worlds, walked through underground gardens where bioluminescent plants glowed in the darkness, and spent hours in the lower library reading about cultures neither of them had ever encountered. For Vesa, these adventures were a revelation. The palace she had thought of as a prison was actually full of wonders, if one knew where to look. But today, as she made her way to their usual meeting spot in the conservatory, Vesa's steps were heavy. In her hand, she clutched a formal announcement that had been delivered to her chambers that morning. Malik was already waiting among the earth plants, examining a tomato vine with great interest. He turned when he heard her approach and his smile faded immediately. What is wrong? He asked. Vesa handed him the announcement without speaking. Malik read it quickly, his expression growing more troubled with each line. The Grand Aerial Festival would be held in 4 weeks. It was the most important celebration in dragon culture, held once every 5 years. All young dragons between the ages of 12 and 20 were required to perform the Sky Dance, a traditional aerial display that honored their ancestors and demonstrated their mastery of flight. There is a note at the bottom, Vesa said quietly. Just for me. Malik found it, a small addendum written in formal script. Princess Vesa was formally excused from participation due to her physical limitations. She would be seated in a place of honor to watch the ceremony. The message was polite, even kind. It made Vesa want to scream. A place of honor, she repeated bitterly. They mean a throne on the ground where everyone can see me sitting alone while my brothers and sisters dance in the sky. Where every dragon in the realm can witness my shame. Malik set the announcement aside and took both of her hands in his. Then we make it so you can dance too. Malik, I cannot fly. We have been through this. My wings are too small, too weak. No amount of wishing will change that. I am not talking about wishing, Malik said, his eyes bright with excitement. I am talking about engineering. He pulled out his ever-present data tablet and began sketching rapidly. Humans cannot fly either, but we invented machines to do it for us. What if we built something to help you? A machine. Vesa stared at the rough drawing taking shape on his screen. It looked like a harness with some kind of support structure. Think about it, Malik said, his words tumbling out quickly. Your wings can move, right? They just cannot lift your weight. So we build a harness that carries your weight for you. Your wings would control direction and balance just like they are supposed to. You would still be dancing, still using your own movements, but with support. Vesa's heart began to beat faster. Is such a thing possible? On Earth, we have suits that help paralyzed people walk. Frames that support weight while the person controls movement. It is the same principle. Malik was already making notes, calculating numbers. We would need lightweight materials. Something strong but not heavy. and a power source for the lift mechanism. The palace has crystal batteries, Vesa said slowly, her mind beginning to race with possibilities. They power the lights and heating systems. They are very light and hold much energy. Perfect. Malik grinned at her. And I know where my father stores the aluminum alloy he uses for decorative work. It is strong but weighs almost nothing. They spent the next 2 hours planning in feverish detail. Malik sketched designs while Vesa explained the movements of the sky dance, showing him how dragons use their wings to turn and dive and spiral. They would need to test the harness in secret, somewhere no one would see them. The abandoned lower courtyard would work, the one with the high walls and no windows. Over the following weeks, they worked every night after the palace slept. Malik stole materials in small amounts so no one would notice them missing. Vesa used her position to access the royal workshops, taking crystal batteries and fine wire. They assembled the harness piece by piece, testing each component carefully. The design was simple but elegant. A lightweight frame sat against Vesa's back and wrapped around her chest, supporting her weight through crystal-powered anti-gravity generators. Her wings slipped through specially designed openings, free to move naturally. When she flapped them or turned them to catch the air, the harness responded, translating her movements into actual flight. The first test was terrifying. Vesa stood in the courtyard with the harness strapped on, Malik holding the control tablet that managed the power flow. When he activated it, she rose 6 inches off the ground and immediately panicked, thrashing her wings wildly. The harness spun her in a circle before Malik could shut it down and she crashed back to earth, breathless and frightened. Again, she said, climbing to her feet. They tried 20 times that night. Vesa learned to trust the harness, to move her wings gently and let the machine amplify her movements. By dawn, she could hover steadily 3 feet above the ground and move forward in a straight line. It was not graceful yet, but it was flight. Real flight. Each night they returned, and each night Vesa improved. She learned to turn, to rise higher, to control her speed. Malik adjusted the harness constantly, fine-tuning the power distribution and balance. After 2 weeks, Vesa could perform basic spirals. After 3, she was attempting the opening sequence of the sky dance. She had never been so happy. On the night before the festival, they were practicing the final sequence when torchlight suddenly flooded the courtyard. Vesa dropped from 10 feet up, landing hard on her feet as the harness automatically stabilized her descent. Standing at the courtyard entrance, flanked by royal guards, was King Thormax. His face was carved from stone, unreadable and terrifying. Behind him, Rahim stood with his head bowed, clearly brought here against his will. The king must have noticed the missing materials and forced him to reveal where his son had gone. "Remove that thing," King Thormax said, his voice deadly quiet. "Father, please," Vesa began, but he cut her off with a gesture. "Remove it. Now." With shaking hands, Vesa unstrapped the harness. Malik moved to stand beside her, his jaw set defiantly even though she could see fear in his eyes. King Thormax walked forward slowly, each step deliberate. He stopped in front of the harness, examining it with cold eyes. "Ingenious," he said finally. "For a human." Then he grasped it in both hands and tore it apart. Crystal batteries shattered, spraying glowing fragments across the stones. Metal bent and snapped. In seconds, weeks of work was reduced to scrap. "No!" Vesa cried out, but guards held her back. King Thormax dropped the ruined pieces at his feet. "Did you truly think I would allow this? That I would permit my daughter to make a mockery of dragon tradition with human technology? I just wanted to dance," Vesa said, tears streaming down her face. "Like my brothers and sisters. Like a real dragon." "You are not like your brothers and sisters," the king said, and each word was a knife. "You cannot fly. That is the truth. That is reality. This mechanical contraption does not change what you are. It could have let me participate. It could have let me be part of my own culture instead of watching from the ground like an outsider. You embarrass yourself with this fantasy." King Thormax's wings flared wide, making him seem enormous in the confined space. "And you embarrass me. I have been patient with your friendship with the human boy. I have allowed you more freedom than perhaps I should have. But this ends now." He turned to the guards. "Take the boy and his father to their quarters. They will be confined there until the festival ends. After that, they will be dismissed from palace service." "Your Majesty, please," Rahim said, speaking for the first time. "My son meant no disrespect. He was only trying to help. He has helped quite enough." The king looked at Malik with something like pity. "You do not understand our ways, human. You think you can fix everything with your clever machines. But some things are not meant to be fixed. Some things simply are. The guards began to escort Malik and Rahim away. Malik struggled against their grip, trying to reach Vesa. "Do not give up," he shouted. "You can still dance. Build another one. Do not let him take this from you." But more guards surrounded him, and his voice faded as they dragged him away. Vesa stood frozen, staring at the broken pieces of the harness scattered across the courtyard floor. Each fragment caught the torchlight, glittering like small stars. King Thormax moved to stand in front of his daughter. When he spoke again, his voice was not angry anymore. It was sad, which somehow hurt worse. "Vesa, I know you do not understand this now, but I am protecting you. If you had appeared at the festival with that device, the other dragons would never have accepted it. They would have seen it as cheating, as refusing to accept what the ancestors decreed. The shame would have been unbearable." "The shame is already unbearable," Vesa whispered. "Then do not make it worse." The king placed one massive hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow you will sit in your place of honor. You will watch the sky dance with dignity. You will accept what you are with grace. And then we will move forward." "And if I refuse?" King Thormax's hand tightened slightly on her shoulder. "Then you will not sit in a place of honor. You will be formally exiled from the dragon realm. Sent to live among the lesser species who will take pity on you. Is that what you want? To be cast out from your family, your people, your home?" Vesa looked up at her father's face, searching for any hint of mercy. She found none. Only certainty that he was right and she was wrong. That her desire to fly was a childish dream that needed to be crushed. "I understand, father," she said quietly. "Good." He removed his hand and stepped back. "Go to your chambers. Tomorrow will be a long day." Vesa walked past him without another word, leaving the broken harness behind. As she climbed the stairs to the upper palace, she could hear the guards sweeping up the pieces. By morning, there would be no evidence that the harness had ever existed. Just like there would be no evidence that for 3 perfect weeks, Princess Vesa had learned to fly. In her chambers, she sat by the window and watched the first moon rise. Tomorrow the grand aerial festival would begin. Tomorrow she would sit alone on her throne and watch her siblings dance among the clouds. Tomorrow she would prove to everyone that she knew her place. But tonight she remembered what it felt like to rise into the air. And that memory burned in her chest like fire. The morning of the grand aerial festival dawned bright and clear. Vesa sat in her chambers staring at the ceremonial gown that had been laid out for her. It was beautiful, woven from silver thread that shimmered like starlight, but it was designed for sitting, not flying. A gown for watching, not participating. She touched the fabric with one claw and felt nothing but emptiness. A soft knock came at her door. Before she could respond, it opened and Malik slipped inside. His eyes were bright with excitement and exhaustion, as if he had not slept all night. Behind him came 3 figures that made Vesa stand in shock. Ambassador Crystalise of the Silicon Collective entered first, her translucent body refracting light into rainbow patterns. Behind her came Elder Deep Current of the Aquatic Union, moving on mechanical legs that allowed him to walk on land. Last was Trade Minister Brightfeather of the Avian Concord, her own wings folded neatly against her small frame. "Your Highness," Crystalise said, her voice chiming like glass bells. "We hope we are not intruding." "How did you get past the guards?" Vesa asked, looking at Malik in confusion. "The guards only watch for unauthorized dragons," Malik said with a small smile. "They do not question respected ambassadors visiting before the festival." He set down a large wrapped bundle he had been carrying. "And ambassadors can bring their own attendants." "We heard what happened in the courtyard," Elder Deep Current said, his voice deep and resonant. "The guards who witnessed it have been talking. Word spreads quickly among those of us who must walk rather than fly." Vesa felt heat rise to her face. "Then you know about my foolishness. About the harness." "Foolishness." Brightfeather ruffled her feathers indignantly. "We know about your courage. About a young dragon who refused to accept the limitations others placed upon her." Malik unwrapped the bundle, revealing a new harness. This one was different from the prototype, sleeker and more elegant. The metal gleamed with an iridescent coating, and the crystal batteries were embedded seamlessly into the frame. It looked less like a machine and more like a piece of jewelry. "How?" Vesa breathed, moving closer to examine it. "I could not sleep after the guards locked us in our quarters," Malik explained. "So I drew new designs better than before. In the morning, when Rahim went to speak with the kitchen staff, I asked him to deliver messages to certain ambassadors. We have all faced discrimination in dragon spaces," Crystalise said quietly. Our peoples are respected for our resources and trade agreements, but in social gatherings we are often overlooked. Those of us who cannot fly are treated as lesser, even if it is done politely. When the human boy's father brought us Malik's message, we understood immediately, Deep Current added. He was not just asking for materials. He was asking us to stand with someone who has been made invisible. Bright Feather hopped forward, her mechanical legs clicking on the floor. My own wings were damaged in an accident when I was young. They healed poorly and cannot carry me far. I know what it is to watch others soar while you remain grounded. If I had been offered a chance to fly again even with assistance, I would have taken it without hesitation. We each contributed what we could, Crystal Lee said. She touched the harness gently. The frame is made from my people's living crystal. It is stronger than any metal and weighs almost nothing. The joints use Elder Deep Current's fluid dynamics technology. And Minister Brightfeather designed the wing interfaces based on her own experience with assisted flight. We worked through the night, Malik said. This harness is better than the first one. It will respond more smoothly to your movements. And it is beautiful enough that it might be seen as ceremonial decoration rather than a machine. Vesa stared at the harness, then at the faces surrounding her. These beings from different worlds, with different bodies and different ways of moving through space, had come together to help her. A human boy, a living crystal, an aquatic elder, and an injured bird had built her wings. Why? She asked, her voice breaking. Why would you risk angering my father for me? Because you matter, Malik said simply. And because what happens today matters. If you sit on that throne and accept that you cannot dance, then every other being who has been told they are broken will learn to accept it too. But if you fly, then you show everyone that there is more than one way to be whole. My father will be furious, Vesa said. He might exile me as he threatened. He might, Crystalise agreed. But he might not. Your father is proud, but he is also politically intelligent. The festival is being attended by representatives from 70 worlds. If he punishes you for finding a way to participate in your own culture, he will appear cruel. Other species will question how dragons treat their own people. And if they question that, Deep Current rumbled, they will question other things. Trade agreements. Alliance terms. The dragons' position as leaders in this sector of space. Vesa looked at each of them in turn. You have thought about this carefully. We have, Brightfeather confirmed. Your father is trapped by his own rules. He cannot stop you without causing a diplomatic incident. At least, not publicly. But he can make my life very difficult afterward, Vesa said quietly. Yes, Malik agreed. He can. That is why the choice must be yours, Vesa. We can give you the means to fly, but only you can decide if it is worth the cost. Vesa walked to her window and looked out over the festival grounds. Already dragons were gathering. She could see her brothers and sisters warming up their wings, practicing their spirals. The viewing platforms were filling with beings from 100 worlds, all come to witness the legendary sky dance. And in the center of it all sat an empty throne, waiting for her to take her place as the grounded princess. She had spent 15 years in that role. 15 years being invisible, being pitted, being the shame her family tried to hide. She had accepted it because she had no choice, because fighting seemed impossible, because she thought she was alone. But she was not alone anymore. Vesa turned back to face her unlikely allies. If I do this, I will need help putting on the harness. And I will need someone to monitor the power levels during the dance. Malik's face broke into a wide grin. I can do that. I will be in the crowd with my father. I will have the control tablet hidden under my robe. The silver delegation has a box near the performance space, Crystalise offered. We can ensure Malik has access to it. No one will question a human attendant serving refreshments. Then I have one more question, Vesa said, looking at the harness. How do we make my father believe this was my idea and mine alone? I will not let any of you suffer for helping me. Elder Deep Current made a sound like water flowing over rocks, which Vesa had learned was his people's laughter. Your Highness, we are ambassadors and trade ministers. We have diplomatic immunity. Your father cannot touch us without causing an interstellar incident. The only one at risk here is you. And me, Malik added. But I do not care about risk. I care about doing what is right. Brightfeather spread her wings slightly, the damaged feathers catching the light. Sometimes doing what is right means standing alone against everyone who says you are wrong. Are you prepared for that, Princess Vesa? Vesa thought about her father's face when he had destroyed the first harness. She thought about the formal exile he had threatened. She thought about losing her home, her title, everything she had ever known. The fear was real and sharp. But then she thought about Malik's stories of Earth, of humans who refused to accept that different meant broken. She thought about Crystal Lise and Deep Current and Bright Feather, who had faced their own barriers and found ways around them. She thought about 3 weeks of secret meetings and forgotten passages and the joy of being seen as a person rather than a problem. She thought about what it had felt like to rise into the air. "Help me put it on," Vesa said. They moved quickly and efficiently. Crystal Lise helped Vesa remove her formal gown and replace it with a simpler flying suit, one that would not tangle in the harness. Malik and Deep Current carefully positioned the frame against her back, making sure each strap sat comfortably. Bright Feather guided Vesa's wings through the specialized openings, adjusting them until they moved freely. When they were done, Vesa stood before her mirror. The harness gleamed against her green scales, looking almost like decorative armor. Her wings, usually drooping and sad, were supported by the frame and sat properly against her back. She looked like a warrior preparing for battle. "How does it feel?" Malik asked. Vesa flexed her wings experimentally. The harness responded perfectly, amplifying her movement. "It feels like possibility." A bell rang somewhere in the palace, signaling that the festival would begin in 1 hour. All participants needed to report to the preparation area. Vesa looked at her reflection one more time, then turned to face her friends. "Thank you," she said. "All of you. No matter what happens today, thank you for believing I was worth this effort." "You were always worth it," Malik said firmly. "Now go show them what you can do." Crystal Lise, Deep Current and Bright Feather left first, returning to their delegations to avoid suspicion. Malik squeezed Vesa's hand once, then slipped out to find his father and get into position. Vesa waited a few moments, then walked out of her chambers wearing the harness openly. She passed servants who stopped and stared. She passed courtiers who whispered behind their hands. She held her head high and kept walking. When she reached the preparation area, her brothers and sisters fell silent. Her eldest brother Thornscale looked at the harness with wide eyes. "Vesa, what is that thing?" "It is my way of dancing," she said calmly. "I am participating in the festival. Father will never allow it." "Then he will have to stop me in front of 70 worlds," Vesa replied. She moved to take her place in the formation, and after a moment of shocked silence, the other young dragons parted to let her through. Outside she could hear the crowds gathering. Soon the ceremony would begin. Soon she would either fly or fall. But for the first time in her life, Princess Vesa was not sitting quietly on the sidelines. She was standing in the light, ready to dance. The amphitheater was carved into the side of a mountain, its stone seats rising in curved tiers that could hold 10,000 spectators. Every seat was filled. Dragons perched on the upper levels, their wings casting shadows over the crowd below. The lower seats held beings from across the galaxy, some walking, some floating, some in mechanical chairs or on cushions suited to their unique bodies. The air hummed with anticipation, and the translator devices worn by non-dragons created a soft background buzz of multiple languages. At the center of it all was the performance space, a vast circular area open to the sky. Traditional dragon performances required height and distance, room for the elaborate aerial patterns that had been passed down through generations. Around the circle's edge burned ceremonial flames in every color, fed by crystals that represented the dragon clans. Vesa stood with the other young dragons in the preparation chamber beneath the amphitheater. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her chest. Through the stone walls, she could hear the opening speeches, the formal greetings, the recitation of dragon history. Soon it would be time. Her brother Thornscale moved to stand beside her. He had not spoken to her in 3 years, not since their mother had quietly suggested the family would look more dignified in portraits if Vesa was not included. Now he stared at the harness with an expression Vesa could not read. "You are really going to do this?" he said. It was not a question. "Yes. Father will be watching. Everyone will be watching." "I know." Thornscale was quiet for a moment. Then he said very softly, "I am sorry for pretending you did not exist. It seemed easier than acknowledging that our sister was hurting and we did nothing to help." Vesa looked at him in surprise. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because whether you succeed or fail today, you are the bravest person I have ever met." He touched her shoulder gently, then moved away to join the other performers. The ceremony master, an ancient dragon named Smokewing, entered the chamber. His scales were gray with age and his wings were tattered from 1,000 flights. He looked at each young dragon in turn, then his eyes settled on Vesa and the harness. "Princess Vesa," he said, his voice like grinding stone. "What is the meaning of this device?" Every dragon in the chamber turned to stare. Vesa felt her courage waver, but she forced herself to stand straight. It is an adaptive aid, honored elder. It allows me to participate in the sky dance despite my limitations. The sky dance is performed with one's own wings, not with machines. I will be using my own wings, Vesa replied, keeping her voice steady. The harness only provides support. The movements, the control, the dance itself will be mine. Smokewing studied her for a long moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, the corners of his mouth turned up slightly. In my youth, I knew a dragon who lost a wing in battle. He learned to fly in tight spirals, using his tail for balance. The elders said it was not proper dragon flight. He said flight was flight, regardless of method. The old dragon moved closer and examined the harness with experienced eyes. This is quality work. Who built it? Friends, Vesa said simply. Smokewing nodded slowly. The sky dance honors our ancestors by showing what we can achieve. I see no dishonor in achieving through innovation. He raised his voice so all could hear. Princess Vesa will perform. Any who object may take it up with me after the ceremony. No one objected. Smokewing returned to the entrance and signaled the musicians. The drums began to beat, deep and rhythmic, the sound that had opened dragon ceremonies for 10,000 years. One by one, the young dragons flew up through the opening in the chamber's roof, soaring into the performance space above. The crowd roared approval as each one appeared. Vesa watched them go, her wings trembling slightly. Finally, only she remained. Smokewing looked at her. You are last, as is traditional for royal family members. Make it count, young princess. Vesa nodded, unable to speak. She walked to the center of the chamber and looked up at the circle of sky above. Somewhere in the crowd, Malik would be watching with his control tablet, ready to adjust the harness if needed. Somewhere, Crystalise and Deep Current and Bright Feather would be watching, hoping their gift would work. Somewhere, her father would be watching, his face surely carved from stone. She spread her wings. The harness hummed to life, so quietly only she could hear it. She felt the power cells activate, felt the frame take her weight. And then, with a single powerful beat of her small wings, she rose into the air. The ascent was smooth and controlled. Vesa emerged from the chamber into sunlight and the roar of the crowd washed over her like a physical force. For a moment, the noise and light overwhelmed her and she hovered uncertainly. Then she saw Malik in the silver delegation box, his face split by an enormous smile, and her fear dissolved. She flew higher. The sky dance began with the spiral of origins, where the dancers rose in a coordinated helix pattern, representing the first dragons emerging from the mountain caves. Vesa took her place in the formation, matching her brothers' and sisters' movement for movement. Her wings caught the air and the harness translated her commands perfectly. She was smaller than the others, her spirals tighter, but she was flying. The crowd's roar intensified. Vesa heard gasps and exclamations in a dozen languages. She focused on the dance, blocking out everything else. The spiral transitioned into the flight of stars, where dancers spread across the sky and wove between each other in complex patterns. Vesa's small size became an advantage here, letting her slip through gaps the larger dragons had to fly around. Then came the dive of courage, the most dangerous part of the dance. One by one, the dancers would plummet toward the ground, pulling up at the last possible moment in a display of control and nerve. Vesa watched her siblings perform it flawlessly, each dive bringing cheers from the crowd. Her turn came. She folded her wings and dropped. The air screamed past her scales as she fell faster and faster. The ground rushed up to meet her. She could see individual faces in the crowd now, see their expressions of horror and fascination. At exactly the right moment, she spread her wings and pulled up hard. The harness responded instantly, but the force of the maneuver was tremendous. For one terrible second, Vesa thought the frame would break, that she would crash into the ground in front of everyone. Then the harness stabilized and she soared upward, her wings straining but holding. The crowd exploded into applause. But Vesa was not done. As she climbed back to join the formation, she made a choice. The traditional sky dance was beautiful, but it had been designed for dragons who could fly without help, for bodies that worked in expected ways. Vesa's body was different. Her wings were different. Her flight was different. So her dance would be different too. Instead of following the prescribed pattern for the final sequence, Vesa began to improvise. She used her small wings to perform tight barrel rolls that larger dragons could not manage. She flew close to the ground, incorporating the space that walking species inhabited, the level that most dragons ignored. She spiraled around the ceremonial flame pillars, her wingtips nearly touching the fire. The other young dragons stopped their formation, hovering in confusion. But Vesa continued, pouring every emotion she had ever felt into movement. The loneliness of 15 years became a solo flight at the edge of the performance space. The joy of friendship with Malik became a series of playful loops. The fear of her father's anger became a fierce climb toward the sun. The hope for a different future became a gentle descent back to Earth. She landed in the center of the performance space, her wings spread wide, her chest heaving with exertion. The harness powered down with a soft chime. And for a moment there was absolute silence. Then the amphitheater erupted. The noise was deafening. Beings from 100 worlds were on their feet, cheering and shouting and beating their appendages together in applause. Dragons roared their approval, a sound like thunder rolling through mountains. The other young dancers landed around Vesa, and her sister Emberwing actually embraced her, tears streaming down her scaled face. "That was beautiful," Emberwing whispered. "I have never seen anything like it." Vesa looked up at the royal box where her father sat. King Thormax was standing, his face unreadable from this distance. Beside him, her mother had one hand pressed to her mouth. The king raised one wing in a formal salute, a gesture of respect given only to worthy performances. It was not love. It was not acceptance. But it was acknowledgement. In the silver delegation box, Malik was jumping up and down, waving his arms. Crystalise glowed so brightly she lit up her entire section. Deep Current was making the water over rocks sound, laughing with pure joy. Bright Feather had spread her own damaged wings wide in celebration. Ceremony Master Smokewing flew down to the performance space and landed beside Vesa. He placed one ancient claw on her shoulder. "In 800 years," he said, his voice carrying across the amphitheater, "I have witnessed 300 sky dances. That was the first time I have ever seen one that made me remember why we dance. To celebrate what we can be, not what we have always been." He raised his voice even louder. "The sky dance is complete. Let the celebration begin." The crowd roared again. Music started playing and dragons began to fill the air in joyful flight. But beings from other species did something unusual. They came down to the performance space, walking or rolling or floating to where Vesa stood. They wanted to see the harness up close, to touch it, to understand it. A young crystalline child approached shyly, her body flickering with uncertain light. "I cannot change color like other crystals," she said quietly. "My parents say I am broken." "But you are not broken, are you?" Vesa knelt down so she was eye level with the child. "No," she said firmly. "I am not broken. I am different. And different can be wonderful." The child's light grew brighter, steadier. She reached out and touched one of Vesa's wings with a crystalline hand, then ran back to her parents who were crying tears that sparkled like diamonds. More came. A boy with mechanical legs. A girl who could not speak but signed with her tentacles. An elder who had lost his sight but navigated by sound. Each one touched the harness, touched Vesa's wings, and she saw in their faces the same thing she had felt when Malik first told her she was not broken. Hope. The celebration continued for hours. Vesa spoke with more beings that day than she had in her entire life. She was invited to visit other worlds, to speak at councils, to share her story. Ambassadors who had never acknowledged her before now treated her as an equal. Her siblings asked about the harness, genuinely curious. As the sun began to set and the crowds finally dispersed, Vesa found Malik sitting on the edge of the performance space, the control tablet in his lap. She sat beside him, her wings aching pleasantly from the day's exertion. "You changed the ending," Malik said. "That was not what we practiced." "I know. I hope you do not mind." "Mind?" "Vesa, it was perfect." He looked at her seriously. "You took what we built and made it yours. That is exactly what it was meant for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow there would be consequences. Tomorrow her father would have words for her. Tomorrow the real work of changing dragon culture would begin. But today, for the first time in her life, Princess Vesa had danced among the stars. And no one could ever take that away from her. The morning after the festival, Vesa woke to find her chambers filled with messages. Data tablets were stacked on every surface, each containing requests, invitations, or questions. The Aquatic Union wanted to discuss accessibility modifications for their embassy. The Avian Concord invited her to speak at their youth conference. 3 different universities asked if they could study the harness design. A children's hospital on a distant world requested her presence to inspire young patients. Vesa sat among the messages, overwhelmed. She had expected anger from her father, perhaps punishment. She had not expected this flood of attention. A soft knock on her door made her look up. Her mother, Queen Sylviana, entered quietly. They had not spoken privately in years. "May I sit?" the queen asked. Vesa gestured to a chair. Her mother settled gracefully, her wings folded perfectly as always. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Queen Sylviana reached out and took her daughter's hand. "I have failed you," she said simply. "As your mother, I should have fought for you. Instead, I let your father's shame become my own. I let tradition matter more than your happiness. I am sorry." Vesa felt tears prick her eyes. "Mother, Let me finish," Sylviana said gently. "Yesterday watching you dance I realized something. You found more courage in 15 years of being ignored than I have found in a lifetime of being honored. You are remarkable, Vesa. Not despite your wings, but because of everything you have overcome." "I did not overcome it alone," Vesa said. "Malik and the ambassadors helped me." "Yes, they did. And you had the wisdom to accept that help." The queen smiled sadly. "That is a lesson I am still learning. Your father wishes to speak with you. He is in the council chamber. He asked me to prepare you, though I am not sure what I am supposed to say except that he is trying in his way to understand." After her mother left, Vesa dressed carefully in formal robes and made her way to the council chamber. King Thormax stood at the great window overlooking the palace gardens, his massive form silhouetted against the morning light. He did not turn when she entered. "You defied me," he said quietly. "Yes, father. You could have been killed. If the harness had failed during the dive of courage, you would have struck the ground at terminal velocity. I trusted the work. I trusted my friends." King Thormax finally turned to face her. His eyes were tired, and Vesa realized with shock that her father looked old. "When you were born with twisted wings, the healers told me you would never fly. They suggested I send you away to be raised quietly on a distant world, where other dragons would not see our family's shame. Your mother refused. She said you deserved to know your heritage even if you could not fully participate in it." Vesa had never heard this story. "What did you say?" "I agreed with her, though for the wrong reasons. I thought if we kept you close, taught you dignity and grace, you could still have value as a princess even if you could not fly. I thought I was being kind." He moved to sit in his throne, suddenly looking weary. "But I was not kind. I was cruel. I made you feel invisible because I could not bear to look at you and see my own failure." "Your failure?" Vesa asked, confused. "A king is supposed to protect his children, to fix their problems, to make their lives perfect. I could not fix your wings, so I chose to pretend they were not broken. I told myself I was teaching you acceptance, but really I was teaching you shame." King Thormax's voice cracked slightly. "Yesterday I watched you dance and I realized that you did not need me to fix you. You were never broken. I was the one who needed fixing." Vesa crossed the room and knelt before her father's throne. "I spent years angry at you. At Mother. At everyone who made me feel like I did not belong. But Malik taught me something. He said that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I do not want to be poisoned anymore, father. So I forgive you." The king reached down and touched her face gently. "You are wiser than I was at your age. Wiser than I am now." He stood, suddenly looking more formal. "The council has been in session since dawn. They have made certain decisions that I have approved." "What kind of decisions?" "The Grand Council recognizes that our empire includes many species with many different ways of moving through the world. We have been thoughtless in how we design our spaces and conduct our ceremonies. This must change." King Thormax walked to his desk and picked up an official document. "You are hereby appointed Ambassador of Accessibility for the Dragon Realm. Your mandate is to work with all species to ensure our empire welcomes beings of every physical form." Vesa stared at the document, unable to believe what she was reading. "Father, this is a real position? With real authority? You will have a budget, a staff, and direct access to the council. You will also have the authority to modify any public building or ceremony that excludes beings based on physical ability." He handed her the document. "The position is yours if you want it. You may also refuse. I will not force this upon you." "I want it," Vesa said immediately. "But I will need help. This is too much work for one person. You will have advisors. In fact, the council has already approved your first appointment." King Thormax touched a communication panel and spoke into it. "Send them in." The chamber doors opened and Malik entered, followed by his father Rahim. The boy looked nervous but determined. Rahim bowed deeply to the king. "Your Majesty, you summoned us?" "I did." Malik, son of Rahim, The Grand Council has voted to offer you a full scholarship to the Imperial Academy of Engineering. You will study advanced technology and adaptive design. Upon graduation, you will serve as chief engineer in the Office of Accessibility. King Thormax looked at the boy seriously. You showed remarkable skill in building the harness. We would be fools not to cultivate that talent. Malik's eyes went wide. Your Majesty, I do not know what to say. Say yes, Vesa said, grinning at him. We have a lot of work to do and I cannot do it without you. Then yes, Malik said, his voice strengthening. Yes, I accept with gratitude and honor. Rahim placed a hand on his son's shoulder, pride evident in every line of his face. King Thormax nodded in satisfaction. Good. You will both begin your duties after the festival celebrations conclude. Dismissed. As they left the council chamber, Vesa grabbed Malik's arm. Can you believe this? We are going to change the entire empire. It will take years, Malik said practically, though he was smiling. Decades probably. Dragon culture is thousands of years old. We cannot shift it overnight. But we can shift it, Vesa said. One ramp at a time. One modified doorway at a time. One ceremony change to include everyone. She spread her wings, the harness she still wore gleaming in the corridor's light. We proved yesterday that different can be beautiful. Now we get to prove it every day. Over the following months, Vesa and Malik traveled throughout the Dragon Realm. They visited cities where the architecture assumed everyone could fly and worked with local governments to add lifts and walkways. They consulted with species who had felt excluded from dragon spaces and learned what changes would make them feel welcome. They trained architects and city planners to think about accessibility from the beginning, not as an afterthought. The harness became a symbol. Other dragons with flight difficulties came forward, asking for help. Beings from other species reached out to share their own stories of exclusion and adaptation. Slowly, dragon culture began to shift. It was not easy, and there was resistance from those who valued tradition over inclusion. But Vesa stood firm, and her father supported her publicly even when it cost him politically. 6 months after the festival, Vesa stood in the redesigned palace gardens. The paths were now level and wide enough for wheeled chairs. Ramps connected different elevations. Benches sat at varying heights to accommodate different species. And in the center, where she had once sat alone and invisible, there was now a fountain with a plaque. The inscription read, "Different ways of being whole, dedicated to all who find their own path to flight." Malik stood beside her, reading the inscription. Do you remember the first day we met? When I brought you that drink and you told me to leave? I remember thinking you were either very kind or very foolish, Vesa said. I was both, Malik admitted. But mostly I was curious. I saw you sitting alone and wondered why. That curiosity changed both of our lives. It changed more than just our lives, Vesa said. She gestured at the garden where beings of a dozen species now gathered comfortably. Look at this. Dragons walking beside aquatics. Avians resting on benches next to crystals. This place used to be designed only for those who could fly to it or those who served dragons. Now it belongs to everyone. Ambassador Vesa, a voice called. A young dragon approached, moving awkwardly on the ground. His wings were even smaller than Vesa's, almost vestigial. I wanted to thank you. My parents just commissioned a harness for me based on your design. Next year, I will perform in the sky dance. Vesa knelt to be at eye level with the child. What is your name? Ember Smoke, Ambassador. Ember Smoke, when you dance, do not just copy what others do. Find your own way of moving through the air. Make it yours. That is what makes it beautiful. The child nodded eagerly and ran back to his parents, who bowed gratefully to Vesa. She watched them go, feeling the familiar warmth of purpose in her chest. Do you ever miss it? Malik asked. The quiet? When you were invisible and no one expected anything from you? Vesa considered the question honestly. Sometimes, she admitted. This work is hard. Every day someone challenges me, tells me I am ruining tradition or demanding too much change too fast. Some dragons still will not look me in the eye. Some species think I am a token appointment, meant to make the empire look progressive without real change. But, Malik prompted. But I am seen now. Truly seen. Not as the broken princess or the shameful daughter, but as myself. As someone who matters and can make things better. She looked at her friend, this human boy who had grown into a skilled engineer and trusted advisor. You gave me that, Malik. You saw me when I was invisible and treated me like I was worth knowing. Everything that came after started with that choice. Malik shook his head. I just brought you a drink and asked if you were thirsty. You are the one who had the courage to fly. We both had courage, Vesa said. You had the courage to see past what everyone else saw. I had the courage to believe you. Together we had enough courage to change the world. Or at least to start changing it. They stood together in the garden as the sun set, casting long shadows across the accessible paths and welcoming spaces. Tomorrow there would be more work. More buildings to modify, more ceremonies to redesign, more minds to change. The task would never truly be finished, because inclusion was not a destination but a constant practice. But today, in this moment, Vesa looked at the garden full of beings who belonged there and felt something she had never felt before. She felt proud. Not of her wings or her flight or even her accomplishments. She felt proud of her scars, her struggles, her difference, because those things had taught her to see others who were struggling and help them find their own way to fly. Above them, dragons spiraled through the evening sky in their traditional patterns. Below them, beings who could not fly gathered in spaces built for walking. And in the middle, on a bench designed to be comfortable for any body, a dragon princess and a human engineer sat together, planning tomorrow's changes. The greatest strength, Vesa had learned, was not flying alone. It was accepting help when offered, offering help when needed, and building a world where everyone belonged. That was the real dance. And it was just beginning.